connected. Okay. All right. Well, thank you everyone again for coming and welcome. I'm so glad everyone's here to learn more about pollinators and what you can do to help them out. So as you can see here, we're going to cover a few different topics. Basically, what are pollinators? How does pollination work? Why are they so important, and why do they need help? And then finally, how you can start your garden if you haven't already. And so we're going to talk about first, what are pollinators? Well, it's very simple. They are small creatures, animals and insects that help flowers to reproduce. And that includes birds, bats, bees, butterflies, beetles, a lot of bee words, flies, and even small animals. And I'd like to go ahead and show you a very short film. It's about 4 minutes long that highlights some of the amazing pollinators in our ecosystems. I'm going to go ahead and play that. pause it there. Sorry if anyone couldn't hear the sound. Like Erica said, we can share that video if anyone wants to go and watch it again. I just think it is so beautiful. These little tiny creatures, just they really do amazing things. And there are so many different kinds. We think of bees, of course, usually, and perhaps butterflies, but we don't usually think of bats and flies and moths. So there are just so many different kinds of pollinators. I do want to spotlight native bees, just because they are such an important type of pollinator. Like it says here, we have over 4,400 species of native bees in North America, just in North America alone. These are sometimes very specific species that interact with very specific plants. And I'll show you a picture of a squash bee is a really great example because there are about 15 or so species of it, and they only pollinate squash and zucchini and plants like that. And if anyone is curious, in North Carolina alone, so we know there are over 4,400 species in North America. Just in North Carolina, where we are, there are over 500 species of native bees. There are also over about 177 species of butterflies and 2,800, more than 2,800 species of moths. So it is pretty amazing. And there's even an unknown number of other insect pollinators. And so these creatures are really amazing. And so just to make sure everyone knows, what we mean when we say native plants and animals is simply that they evolved in that particular region with the land, and that they were not, they're native to that area means that they, excuse me 1 second.
I bought my
Sorry about that. It's hard these days with the COVID times and having to do everything on Zoom. But yes, so native means that they were not carried over from a different area, and they originate in this area. And just because a plant is, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, just because a plant is not native doesn't necessarily mean it has to be invasive. Some non-native species will come and they will sort of invade and take over, and they will push out other native species, and that's what we don't want. Some non-native species can be okay. It just depends, but mostly we want to stick with natives. And so what makes them so important is just these mutually beneficial relationships, is what we call it. So just like the squash bee that I mentioned, another really fun example is with bats and agave. If you've heard of agave nectar, agave is completely dependent on bat pollination. And that's also, if you're an adult, that's where tequila comes from. So that's pretty important. But yes, so there are a lot of very specific relationships between these native plants and animals. And I'm going to go to the next slide here. Okay. So how does this work? Well, it's pretty simple. The pollinator, visits the flower, and that could be because they're specifically getting the pollen, or it could just be so they can drink nectar. There are a number of different reasons, but they visit the flower, they get the pollen from the stamen on the pollinator. So like maybe on the bee, you can see with this bee, there's some pollen on their leg. And then it visits a different flower and it gets on the stigma of that flower. And that's what allows, and then it transports down to down the style to the ovules. And that's what allows flower reproduction. So that is a really key function that pollinators perform. Now there are some plants that use wind pollination, and some can self-pollinate, and there are a few different methods, but as you can see here, 90% of flowering plants depend on pollinators. So that is the vast majority of them. So it's a very big deal. And if you're curious, how do they attract those pollinators? Well, it's a combination of factors: the shape of the flower, the smell, the color, all different things, different aspects can attract different pollinators. So for example, hummingbirds are often attracted to red flowers. And there's that squash bee that I was telling you about, and it's only attracted to squash plants that are in the squash family. And then sometimes there are guiding lines, different things like that. So the flowers have like tricks up their sleeve to get those insects to come and pollinate them. So that brings us to, why are they so important? Well, of course, like we said, over 90% of these flowering species, you have a red hummingbird feeder. Yep, that's their favorite color. So a lot of these flowering species depend on pollinators, and of course that's really important ecologically. It's also really important to humans because 1 out of every 3 bites of food we eat depends on these partnerships. It's really amazing. All the foods that you see on the screen right now are only possible thanks to the plant-pollinator relationships. We've got pumpkins, potatoes, blueberries, apples, almonds, even sugar. Sugarcane is dependent on pollination. We've also got kale, vanilla bean, and tomatoes. These are just some examples. There are a lot of them. So it's really just actually crucial to our own food that we eat. And so just to dive a little bit into the pollinator ecology here, the plant relationships that they support, I mean, they do all of these things. They help with the nutrient cycling in the environment of oxygen and carbon sequestration and all of that good stuff. They support the biodiversity of the land. Keeping plants healthy helps to keep the soil healthy as well, so that you have erosion control. And of course, sometimes the pollinators get eaten. So, they're supporting the populations that predate on them, like birds and spiders. And of course, they also just provide beauty in nature. You love looking at a butterfly and a hummingbird. They're just really enjoyable. So they provide humans with that sort of recreational value as well. So there's just all kinds of things. These little guys are just crucial to everything, basically, in the world. So, okay, so why are they in trouble? Well, there are a number of threats facing pollinators right now. Many of them are human caused, unfortunately. We've got habitat loss. So as you can see here, that this is just an example of a city. And a lot of the cities, of course, that we have built used to be natural areas. So that's decreasing how many natural areas they have to just live in and have their habitat. Another issue is pesticides. We have tended to use a lot of pesticides, and especially in recent times, sometimes a lot more than we really need. And so those chemicals are not great for pollinators. They're really, and some of them are especially not good. I mean, it's basically a poison. And so we're putting poison out onto plants, and even if we're not putting it directly onto the pollinators, they're then going to land on those plants and eat the nectar and everything, and so that pesticide is going to affect them. Another issue is invasive species. A lot of times that's because of humans too, because we travel and we bring plants and animals with us, and those plants and animals that we bring with us can negatively affect their habitat. And so then there's climate change and parasites and diseases, which can't necessarily do anything about that. But what can we do? We can create habitat right in our own backyards. Even if you live in an urban area in a city, you can still create a little pollinator garden, and those actually make a really big difference. Those can help create a path for pollinators to fly, even in cities. So no space is too small, and every bit helps. And they're also, what you see here on the upper corner at the little house, as well as the mug. We're not going to talk about those today, but those are fun projects if you'd like to look into them. They are basically like little bee hotels. And then they don't have to be this fancy. You can just use a regular piece of wood, but if you want to make it cute, you can. They're basically, you take and you drill different sizes of holes in the wood, and that gives nesting bees somewhere to nest. And that actually can help too if you have a problem with carpenter bees, because I know sometimes people don't want carpenter bees making holes in their porch or things like that. If you give them their own little space, that can also help you with that problem. So that gives them somewhere to go in your yard. And of course, finding alternatives to harmful pesticides. Oh, that is awesome. You have a pollinator garden. That is so cool. That is perfect. So finding alternatives to harmful pesticides. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a moment. And of course, bug someone. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell other people, because the more of us that are doing this, the better results will be, because the more gardens we have, it can only get better. So that is what we can do. And just to spotlight monarchs, of course, since that's what we have to start with. We have our milkweed and our monarch packets. Monarchs, and you can see their life cycle here in the upper corner, are amazing little creatures. They are very famous, of course. They're one of the most famous pollinators. They start out as these little bitty eggs. They're so tiny. And when they hatch, first they eat the egg that they hatched out of. That's their first meal. And then they eat milkweed leaves. And that is all they eat. And they eat and they eat. I mean, there's a reason why that book is called The Hungry Caterpillar. They're very hungry little guys. They actually eat and grow so much that it is proportionately the same as a human baby growing to the size of a school bus. So they really grow and grow when they're little caterpillars, and they go through 5 stages. And then they finally, when they're ready, they shed that skin and they turn into this chrysalis, where they have their transformation into the adult monarch. So they are just really amazing with their life cycle and their migration, which of course you can see on this side of the screen. This is what their migration patterns look like. And that's one of the most distinctive things about monarchs, is they start out in the very southern area here, or over here in California. Those are the western monarchs. But of course, we are here in North Carolina, so we will see the eastern monarchs. And so they start out and they live about 2 or 3 months. That's their lifespan. And they go throughout the spring and the summer, and they make their way further and further north, where it's a little bit cooler, so they can have that nice temperature. But then in the fall, when it starts to get cold again, they will actually, their 4th generation of their babies will live actually 8 or 9 months. So all of a sudden, that 4th generation has a much longer lifespan, because they go all the way from up in this area down, 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 down to Mexico. So they make an amazing journey. And some of them, of course, like I said, there are also the California ones, and there are some of them that overwinter here. But a lot of these monarchs will go all the way to Mexico. And so that's where they will stay over the winter. There is a mountain, there's the Transvolcanic Mountains down in Mexico. There are only, oh, sorry about that. There are only about a dozen overwintering sites down in Mexico that they will, so it's a very specific place, but it's got like the perfect climate for them to overwinter. And so, excuse me one second. Oh, and if you want to see an amazing film about the monarch's migration and how they discovered that migration using like taggings, they would put little bitty tags on the butterflies. I definitely recommend watching Flight of the Butterflies. That's what it's called. I'll type it in the chat too. It is amazing. And I believe it is available for free on Pluto TV if you Google it, but it's called Flight of the Butterflies. It's beautiful. And so the unfortunate part though about monarchs and their amazing journey is that the number of monarchs has decreased in recent times. And this is partially due to the same reasons as all the other pollinators. Oh, I sent it directly to you. And so, you know, habitat loss, pesticides, things like that. But it's also because their only plants are milkweeds that they will lay their eggs on, because that's the only thing their babies will eat is milkweed. So, and you can kind of tell by the name that humans, we really didn't like milkweed. We put weed in the name, so we think it's a weed, but it's really not. It doesn't actually grow that aggressively. But we got rid of a lot of those milkweeds. And so you can tell in the chart where we start off with like a lot of monarchs, and we gradually get to where we are now. And so that is not great for the monarchs. And so that's why we want to plant that milkweed, is that really is crucial for the monarchs. Let's see, let me just, and they judge that based on how many monarchs they find in those mountains and in the California region overwintering. So it's an easy way to count them. Let me just go to the next section here. Okay, and so that's why we're starting with milkweed for the monarchs. Like I said, this creates a place to put their eggs. It provides nectar as well for the adult monarchs. And it also supports a wide diversity of pollinators, actually, not just the monarchs, but bumblebees and other types of bees will also use that milkweed and get nectar from it. So it's a really great plant to either enhance your pollinator garden that you already have or to start a new one. And of course, I just think they're beautiful. The colors are very vivid and they make nice flowers. And so with that, I will pause just a moment to see if anyone has any questions about any of that. Because we just talked about a lot of stuff about pollinators, a lot of background information, and I'll keep checking just in case. A nonprofit organization for kids called the Earth Rangers. Ooh, oh, that is awesome. Been there for a few months now, and it's fun. It's an app, and you can, oh, that is really cool. I have not heard about that. I'm definitely gonna have to look into it. Thank you. Okay, so let's go on to the planting tips. Let's see, oh, that zooms it in. Okay, so planting for this milkweed, which is what you have in your packet. If you don't have your packet yet, you will get it soon. And of course, I believe the last threat of frost has already passed for us in this area. So I think we don't have to worry about that. But if you are planting outside, you don't want it to get frost. These seeds have been pre-stratified, I believe, which is when they have to be cold for a certain amount of time, and that helps them to grow. It's kind of like overwintering for monarchs. So you don't have to worry about that. You just want to soak them in the water for up to 6 hours. And we don't want to use tap water. We want to use like spring water. And that gets them started. And then you just plant them 1/8 of an inch, so just a little bit below the soil surface. You can even use a damp paper towel if you want to start them. You can use a growing tray if you want to do that. And you can just use regular garden soil or seed starters, either way. And if you are starting indoors, it's ideal to use like a deep pot. So that way, because milkweeds tend to have pretty long roots, so it has plenty of room for the roots. And again, if you are doing them indoors to start with, you want to make sure that it doesn't get too much cooler than 70 degrees for them. And it should take about 3 to 4 weeks. Oh, and I meant to tell you, all this information is at livemonarch.com/growing instructions, and that's where our packets came from. So if you need to look these up again later, they're all on the website, or feel free to take a picture, and this is being recorded too, so you can always watch it again. And so once they sprout, you just want to make sure to keep them moist for a few weeks, and then you can transplant them to larger containers if they need to. If it looks like they're starting to run out of room, make sure you have good soil. And you can, if you want to add a little bit of fertilizer, you can. That's not really necessary. But yes, and one concern I think people have is that they're worried that the milkweed is going to, take over their yard or something like that. That doesn't usually happen, but if you are worried about that, and after it flowers, you can take a picture and post it on Facebook. Yes, that's awesome.
Samantha, Lee has a question for you.
Oh, yes.
Is milkweed an annual or perennial, and will it keep coming back year after year once we plant them?
Yes, it is a perennial, so it will keep coming back. Yeah, you don't have to replant them. That's really convenient. And does it need a lot of sun? Excellent question. They do prefer at least about 6 hours of sun per day. So if you can find a good sunny spot, that's ideal. Yeah, but yes, it will come back. And I was going to say here, as I've got in this little square, if you want to encourage your milkweed, now this is once it's grown up, right? And it's done its thing, and maybe some caterpillars have eaten the leaves and everything, you can actually cut it like about 4 inches above the soil, or just above the lowest branching of the stalk. And then when it grows back, it'll actually get more, it'll be more full. But that's later down the road. And the reason I put 2 stars after that is you just want to be careful if you do cut it of the sap. The sap can be, it can kind of burn your skin. So you want to do gloves when you do that, and make sure you wash your hands. But yes, those are really great questions. How tall does it get? It gets about 4 to 6 feet. So it's pretty tall. It's a pretty tall plant. If you're planting your garden, depending on if you're kind of up against the wall, like if there's a kind of a back of your garden, they're really good like back plants because they're so tall. If it's more of a circular garden, you can kind of put them in the middle and then put the shorter plants around them. I think that's a really good way to do that. Yes, you are so welcome. Yes, it is a pretty tall plant once it does grow up.
Hey Samantha, I've only ever seen them like about waist high.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that the people who had them cut them back? Is that why they weren't taller?
It could. It could mean they were young. They were just young, or it could also mean that it's a different type of milkweed, because there are a few different species. And the one that we are planting, I believe, is the common milkweed, which is really good for monarchs. And so that one, that's a tall variety, but I think there might be a few like a little bit shorter varieties out there. But this one should be pretty tall. It does take a while though. I think it might take a year or two before they get that tall. You know, they have to get well established, and you want to make sure that you do, like I said, keep them moist for a few weeks once they sprout, and just make sure they're not getting too dry especially during that first year, because you want to get them to, you know, get them well established. But once they are established, they should mostly just be fine with very little maintenance, because they are native. They're used to living in North Carolina, and then just the rain that naturally occurs should take very good care of them. So yeah, these are all really great questions. Thank you, everyone. And if there are no more questions at the moment, let's see. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next little part here, and I just want to give you a little bit. Oh, and really quickly before I change over, I just want to mention, like I said, these are the common milkweeds. There are two other species that are very common. In fact, I think I'll type them in the chat here. Let me put everyone this time. There is the butterfly milkweed, which is the orange one. Actually, I'm gonna zoom out here so you can see that's the orange one. That butterfly milkweed is a really fun one, and that one's also known as Railroad Annie, because Annie is, you know, that character from that movie with the red curly hair, and you also have, or the orange hair, and they also used to commonly grow near railroads because it just was a good habitat for them, so they called it Railroad Annie. But yes, common milkweed, butterfly milkweed, those are common, and then also swamp milkweed is the third kind. And if you have a very wet yard, you have a very, like, you know, maybe you get a lot of rain, maybe it kind of the water builds up a lot. Swamp milkweed, okay, use that. Swamp milkweed actually might be great for your yard because it's like really good in like wet conditions. So that's another thing to look into if you want to try a different kind. So one moment. Sorry, I'm out of order. Okay, so just a moment to talk about pesticide alternatives. Basically, we want to try to reduce our dependency on pesticides as much as we can. So biodiversity, which means just as many different types of plants as you can have in this situation, is actually will lead to natural pest control, because when you have a good little ecosystem, there will be predators of your pests, and so they'll keep the population down. A lot of the problem that we have with like our agriculture these days is the tendency to just plant one crop over a bunch of fields, you know, maybe corn or whatever the crop is. Just having that one crop is really problematic, because then that doesn't encourage the diversity of the different plants and animals, and that's why we get imbalance, and that's why we end up having to use pesticides. So the more diversity that you can incorporate in your little garden, the better. So an example of that is down at the bottom, you see the ladybug and the aphid. Aphids can really hurt some of your plants, but ladybugs will actually eat aphids. So if you get ladybugs, that can actually really help out with aphids. And I have some examples of some native plants that ladybugs really like if you want to attract ladybugs. So I can give people that. But so that's an example. Another one is soap and water, which is just really simple. You can use, if you had like a milkweed and it was covered in aphids, what you could do is, and if you had any caterpillars, you know, like the monarch caterpillars that we want, you would want to cut the leaves off that where the caterpillars are, remove them to a safe place, and then you would spray down the plant with aphids with soap and water. And then you would want to rinse really well with water, and then you would put the caterpillars back on the plant, and that can really help just clear out some of those aphids if you have too many. But yeah, so there are some, you know, there's some other solutions, but just before you have to turn to pesticides. Another really good example is nobody likes mosquitoes, right? And there's a good reason for that. They're generally pests. They can carry diseases, and so we don't want mosquitoes. And so one thing you can do is try to avoid any standing water, especially stagnant water, that never moves, anywhere in your yard. So in a bucket or in a tire, sometimes water collects in tires, just anywhere, standing puddle. You just want to be really careful to not have that water that stays there for so long. And because mosquitoes need stagnant water in order to breed. So just avoiding that can already help you prevent mosquitoes before you ever have to worry about chemicals or anything. But of course, sometimes we have to. Sometimes we have to use chemicals when we really need to, and that's okay. Just make sure you think about, do I really need to? And are there any alternatives that I could try before I use the chemicals? And also avoid neonicotinoids. Those are not great for native bees at all. So that is a great, 4 o'clock flowers, okay. Thank you, that is a good tip. Bait plants. When you say bait plants, do you mean to help distract the pest away from your plants, or to attract the predators of the pests? That I think that's my question. But yes, let's see. Let me. Oh, okay. So I think I have one more thing to show. To attract predators. I know that I can give you a list of native plants that attract ladybugs specifically, and those are really good to help. Ladybugs will help eliminate aphids, mites, and scale. And so I know about those. I don't know about any other ones, but I could find out.
Well, we might have some advanced gardeners or master gardeners on with us today. If we do, feel free to unmute or type into the chat if you know the answer to that.
Yes. And I'll post, in the meantime, I will post my list of all the native plants that are really good for attracting ladybugs, if anyone is curious. So here is that list. So those are ladybugs really love those plants, especially the top two. The top two are like their favorite plants. Okay, so we have just a little bit more here. Just some more resources. And I know that's a lot. That's a lot of resources. There were just so many, it was hard to pick because there is just so much really good information out there. And I just had to pick some. So these are some of the best ones. Wildflower.org is the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. And so if you want to look up anything about any native or wildflowers, that's a great place to look them up and find out more information. Oh, and livemonarch.com, of course, is where we got our packets. So they're awesome. ncwildflower.org is also really neat because they have got a directory of plant nurseries. So if you want to find out where you can get more plants, that is a really awesome resource, as well as I believe they have some of the natural pest control information as well. NC Pollinator Alliance is great. Pollinator.org/guides is a really good one as well, because they've got all different guides for all different regions of the country, because of course you can't just use the same list of native plants because all the plants aren't native to all the places in the country. Of course, there are different regions. So if you go to that website, the one for our area over here where we are in the Piedmont is called Southeastern Mixed Forest. So if you go to that pollinator.org/guides, you click on the Southeastern Mixed Forest, you will get all kind of really good information for our area. And of course, Xerxes is another, it's kind of like the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, and monarchwatch.org is just another one about monarchs. So there's just all kind of really great information out there that is available to us. That's also part of what makes it difficult sometimes because there's so much information. And that's why we want to start with the milkweed, because it just gives us a good place to start and just something concrete that we can do. And the pictures that you see around, the flowers that you see around, those are some more examples of some flowers that are native to our area. So if you just want to start expanding out beyond the milkweed, eastern columbine, purple coneflower, the blue-eyed grass, and the bee balm, those are really good ones for pollinators. And they will add some different colors and different textures and blooming seasons and all kinds of really great things to your yard. So, so those are some good examples. I think I'm ready to wrap up this presentation, and you all are ready to go out and start your garden or increase your garden if you already have one. And if anyone has any more questions, I will be happy to answer them. Or if I don't have the answer, then we will definitely get it for you. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Samantha.
Yes, you are very welcome.